The next day, true to her word, Madame Sarah arrived at her brother Mr. Anthony's house. When she walked in, she found Bridget resting against a chair, holding a white nylon bag filled with the medicine the doctor had given her the day before. Bridget looked tired, her eyes heavy from exhaustion, but she was grateful for the rest. However, when Sarah saw her daughter, she was far from happy. Her face tightened with concern and anger. She turned to her brother Mr. Anthony, and with a voice full of frustration she asked, "What have you guys done to my daughter?" Her eyes flashed as she looked from Bridget back to her brother, demanding an answer. Happy stood silently off to the side, not saying a word. She avoided making eye contact, feeling guilty but unwilling to speak up. Mr. Anthony, sensing the rising tension, tried to explain. "It's nothing, sister. Bridget just had a slight fever. I've taken care of it. We went to the hospital yesterday and the doctor said it's just stress. She needs to rest for a few days." Madame Sarah, already boiling with anger, quickly cut him off. "It's not just stress, Anthony. It's your wife, Happy. She's the one stressing my daughter by leaving all the work for her to do. Bridget has been doing everything around this house while Happy does nothing." Sarah's voice was stern, and the frustration she'd been holding back finally came pouring out. "How could you let this happen? She's just a child. And you allowed this." "No problem, I will take her home," Madame Sarah said firm. Anthony, sensing that his sister wasn't going to back down, pleaded with her. "Sister, please," he said, his voice filled with desperation. "I promise she'll change. Please, I beg you, don't take Bridget away. We'll fix this, I swear." He reached out to her, hoping that his words would soften her heart. But Madame Sarah wasn't moved. "No, Anthony. I've had enough. Bridget needs rest, and she can't get that here. She's going with me, and that's final." Her tone was firm, and there was no trace of the anger she had shown earlier. Still, her decision was clear. Anthony, seeing how determined Sarah was, sighed deeply. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment he felt helpless. But he wasn't ready to give up. "Please just give me a chance. Let me fix this. Let Bridget stay for a few more days so I can show you that things will be different." There was a long pause as Sarah stared at her brother, weighing his words. She didn't want to take Bridget away from the only family she had, but her concern for her daughter's well-being was stronger. After what seemed like an eternity, she sighed. "Okay, I've heard you. I don't want to hear this again though," she said, finally relenting. Her tone softened, but there was still a hint of resolve in her voice. "I'm not happy about this, but I'll give you one more chance. Just don't let this happen again, Anthony." With that, she agreed to stay the night, and Bridget, though relieved, was still unsure of what would come next. The next morning, early before the sun had fully risen, Madame Sarah prepared to leave. Bridget, still recovering from her exhaustion, stood in the living room, watching her mother gather her things. There was an awkward silence, but neither spoke much as Sarah prepared to go. "I'll see you soon, Bridget," Sarah said as she gave her daughter a tight hug. "Get some rest, and remember I'm just a call away." Bridget nodded, her eyes a little teary, but she managed a weak smile. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew her mother had done what she thought was best. As Madame Sarah left the house, she didn't look back. She knew she had made her point, and now it was up to her brother and his wife to make sure things changed for the better. The tension had dissipated, but the question remained. Would Happy really change, or would Bridget's sacrifice be in vain? Bridget was not allowed to do any work for several days, as per the doctor's advice. She was to rest and recover from the stress she had been under. This time, Happy knew that she had no choice but to take over the household duties. For the first time, she had to step up and handle everything: cleaning, washing the dishes, and sweeping the house. It was a lot more work than she had ever expected. But even though she managed the cleaning and organizing, there was one thing that kept weighing on her mind: cooking. "What will I do now?" she muttered to herself, staring at the empty kitchen. She felt overwhelmed standing there, thinking about how she had avoided cooking for so long. It was easy to clean, but cooking was a whole different story. I thought I was free from the burden of buying restaurant food, Happy said aloud, sighing in frustration. But I can't cook. What else am I supposed to do? She paced back and forth in the room, racking her brain for a solution. Her eyes darted to the kitchen, and an idea started to form. In the end, she decided she would do what she always did. Take the easy way out. I'll just buy food from a restaurant and pour it in the pot, she whispered to herself, convincing herself it would be fine. No one will know. Happy's plan was simple. When it was time to cook, she would go out and buy food from a nearby restaurant, then pour it into a pot to make it look like she had cooked it herself. She felt a mix of guilt and relief at the thought, knowing it wasn't the right thing to do but hoping it would work. Later, when it was time for the afternoon meal, Happy snuck out of the house, careful not to be seen. Bridget was resting in her room, and Mr. Anthony had already left for work, so she knew she had the house to herself. She hurried to the restaurant, bought a portion of food, and quickly returned home, sneaking into the kitchen. She poured the food into a pot, stirring it to make it seem like it had been freshly prepared. By the time Mr. Anthony came home in the evening, everything seemed to be in order. They ate the meal that Happy had bought earlier in the morning, before he left for work. But the food Happy had sneaked in was ready for dinner. As Happy placed the meal on the table, she sighed in relief. It wasn't ideal, but it would do for now. She just hoped no one would notice the difference. She had gotten away with it for the day, but she knew this couldn't last forever. This continued for a few days, with Happy sneaking around and buying food to avoid cooking, but one day everything changed. Bridget, who had been resting in her room, got up to grab something from the kitchen. As she walked in, she noticed something strange. A nylon bag sitting on the counter, with food stains and a strong smell of ogbono soup. She picked it up, curious, and noticed a name written on it. Mama Kemi Food. At first, Bridget didn't understand what she was looking at. Mama Kemi Food, she whispered to herself. What does this mean? She stared at the nylon, trying to make sense of it. She was sure that earlier, Happy had claimed to have cooked ogbono soup herself. So how could this be? Why was there a bag with the same soup, but from someone else? Bridget stood frozen, holding the nylon in her hands, her mind racing. Didn't Auntie Happy say she cooked ogbono soup? How could she cook it and then still go out to buy the same soup? She felt confused and betrayed. There was no one she could ask, so she quietly placed the nylon back where it was, her mind swirling with questions. She left the kitchen, trying to push the thoughts away, but she couldn't. She knew something wasn't right. What had been going on behind her back? A little while later, Happy came into the kitchen and saw the nylon still sitting on the counter. Her eyes quickly darted around to make sure no one else was around. She peeped through the door, making sure Bridget wasn't nearby, and then hurriedly grabbed the nylon, tossing it in the trash, as if trying to erase all evidence. What Happy didn't know was that Bridget had already seen everything. Bridget quietly watched from the hallway, her heart pounding. She now had more questions than ever before. What was going on? Why was Auntie Happy hiding the truth? From that day on, Bridget kept a close eye on Happy, watching her every move. She made sure not to reveal her suspicions to anyone, keeping her observations secret. She needed to figure out what was really going on with the food from Mama Kemi, and she was determined to uncover the truth. Little did Happy know, Bridget had already started plotting her next move. On the final day of Bridget's rest, Happy was sitting in the living room, enjoying a moment of peace. Bridget had been observing her closely, hiding behind the door, waiting for any sign that would reveal Happy's secret. As Happy got up to leave, Bridget quietly followed her, careful not to be noticed. Happy grabbed her purse, walked outside, and hopped onto a motorcycle. Bridget, with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity, quickly boarded a bike and followed her at a safe distance. Happy arrived at a restaurant, and when Bridget saw the name of the place, her heart skipped a beat. Mama Kemi Restaurant. Her eyes widened in shock. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. There was no doubt now. This was the same name on the nylon of food she had found earlier. Bridget quickly looked for a place to hide, making sure she wouldn't be seen. She watched as Happy entered the restaurant and came out a little later with several bags of food. Happy then got back on a bike and headed home, unaware that Bridget was following her every step. Bridget arrived back at the house before Happy, her mind racing with what she had just discovered. When Happy walked in, Bridget greeted her, trying to act normal, but Happy was in a hurry. "I'm back," she said quickly as she rushed past Bridget. Curious, Bridget silently followed her and peered through the door, watching as Happy entered the kitchen. What she saw next was nothing short of shocking. Happy, without hesitation, began pouring the restaurant food into their cooking pot, pretending like she had cooked it herself. Bridget's heart sank as she watched the scene unfold in front of her eyes. Later that evening, when Mr. Anthony returned home from work, he took his shower, completely unaware of what had been happening behind his back. The dinner was soon served, and as they sat down to eat, Bridget couldn't help but notice something familiar. The food on her plate tasted exactly the same as the meals they had been eating all along, the same ogbono soup and stew, the same rice. But Happy had been claiming that she was the one cooking it all along. Bridget knew the truth now. Happy had been lying. Later that day, Bridget told her uncle, but he responded, "You don't know what you're saying. I know my wife can't do that, and besides, she has been the one cooking before you came." Bridget tried to convince him, but he refused to listen, telling her to go to her room. She reluctantly went. Another time she told her uncle the same thing, but he asked, "Where's your evidence?" Bridget told him, "Prepare for work and act like you're really going. Then wait for 2 p.m. and come back." That's exactly when she goes and buys the food. "I'll also give you a junction to wait at, and when it's time, I will call you to come to the restaurant." This time, her uncle agreed and followed her instructions. The next day, he prepared for work as usual and left. When it was exactly 2 p.m., Bridget called Mr. Anthony and told him to wait for her at the directed junction, which he did. Happy got on a bike and Bridget followed her. When Bridget arrived at the junction, Mr. Anthony joined her, and they both went to the restaurant. Bridget showed him where to stand to observe his wife. As he stood there, Mr. Anthony received the greatest shock of his life. He had been completely unaware of the kind of woman he had married, and now he saw that Happy had been deceiving him all along. After buying the restaurant food, she would go home and serve it as if she had cooked it herself. With his mind clouded with different thoughts and confusion, Mr. Anthony didn't know what action to take. Bridget, noticing his shock, went to him where he stood. "Uncle, let's go so she doesn't get home before us," she said softly. They left, and after a while, Happy came home carrying a wrapped black nylon. She didn't look at anyone, she just rushed inside the kitchen. Bridget and Mr. Anthony followed her quietly, hiding just out of sight. Anthony held his phone, ready to capture what was about to happen. As Happy opened the pot and poured in the food she had bought from the restaurant, they now had the evidence they needed, right from her own husband's phone. When she was done, Happy went to the bathroom, took her bath, and then waited for Mr. Anthony to go shower so she could serve the food she claimed to have been preparing since morning. Mr. Anthony, already knowing the truth, shook his head. "Okay, I've heard," he said quietly, his voice filled with frustration. The food was served, and Happy, clearly proud of herself, started showing off. "Honey, how is the food? I hope it's sweet," she asked, beaming. "I really took my time to prepare this just for you." Bridget, who already knew Happy was lying, smiled to herself. Happy went on, "And you know what? I'll prepare another delicious meal like this for your birthday, which is coming soon." At this point, Mr. Anthony, tired of the bragging and the lies, finally had enough. He dropped his cutlery onto the table, his face filled with anger. "Enough, young lady. Stop fooling me," he said sharply. "You've fooled me enough." Happy, pretending to be confused, asked, "Honey, what do you mean?" Mr. Anthony glared at her. "You are not the one who has been cooking the food I've been eating, not before Bridget came here, and not now that she's resting. Tell me I'm lying," he said, sitting back in his chair at the dining table. Happy, trying to play it off, asked, "What do you mean? I've been cooking my food myself." I've been the one cooking. Her words hit Anthony hard, and his anger boiled over. Without another word, he pulled out his phone and showed her the video. Happy took the phone, her face falling as she watched the footage. She saw herself pouring restaurant food into the pot. The shock was too much to bear. She gasped and shouted, "Jesus!" as the truth hit her. Bridget, who had been silent the entire time, finally burst into uncontrollable laughter. "So, you don't know how to cook, and you wanted to kill me with all the house chores," she said, shaking her head. "Instead of asking me to teach you without anyone knowing, you were just buying food from the restaurant to cover your secret. Well, today your secret is out." Mr. Anthony, now furious beyond words, told Happy, "Pack your things and leave the house. I don't want you anymore. If this is what you want to do, then go ahead. But know that if you had told me the truth, I would have found a way to help solve the problem. Now you've taken matters into your own hands, and it's not right." He stood up and pointed towards the door. "This is the kind of life many girls are living out there. Instead of hiding your secret, you should have asked for help. You can still learn. And you, whether you're 13, 14, 15 or 16, don't wait until you're an adult before learning how to cook. The earlier, the better." Anthony threw Happy's clothes and belongings out of the house. She pleaded, asking for another chance, but Anthony was firm. "Leave. I don't want you here anymore," he said, his voice cold with anger. Happy, devastated, gathered her things and left the house, her heart heavy with shame. When she arrived her parents' house, her mother, Madame Paulina, was sweeping in front of their house. She spotted Happy carrying her luggage, crying, and immediately recognized her. She paused, dropping her broom as she wondered what could have happened. What could be wrong? Why is she crying? Madame Paulina thought to herself, her concern growing. When Happy got closer, she tried to pretend everything was fine, but her mother could see right through her. "Why are you crying, and why are you carrying so many bags?" Madame Paulina asked, her voice filled with concern. Happy, unable to hold it in any longer, broke down and confessed. "My husband. He chased me away because I don't know how to cook," she sobbed. Madame Paulina, though saddened, had a deep understanding of her daughter's situation. She had seen this coming for a long time. "I knew this day would come," she said quietly, shaking her head. She looked at Happy with a mix of frustration and sympathy. "You always say, 'Don't worry, when the time comes I'll learn.' And now look at you. Now you want to learn the hard way, when your mates had already learnt." As they stood there, Clara, Happy's younger sister, came home from work and saw them. She immediately noticed the luggage. "Why are you carrying so many bags, Sister Happy?" Clara asked, concerned. Before Happy could respond, Annabel, who had been at school, came home and was just as surprised to see her elder sister with so many bags. "Where are you coming from? What's going on?" she asked, genuinely confused. Happy, feeling embarrassed, couldn't find the words to explain. But their mother, tired of Happy's excuses, answered for her. "Your sister has been chased away by her husband because she doesn't know how to cook," Madame Paulina said with a slight laugh, almost bitterly. She shook her head. "She has spent all this time loving fashion more than learning the skills that are important." The girls exchanged glances and Clara, now growing frustrated, muttered, "If she doesn't want to learn, let her be. You're not helping her by keeping her around. Her mates are already in their husbands' houses, and she's here, still not knowing how to cook." As the girls walked away, their words struck Happy deeply. She stood there, feeling the weight of their truth. Her mother, still concerned, urged her to come inside. "Don't sit here in the street. Come on, let's go inside," she said, guiding Happy into the house. As Happy sat on the ordinary ground, tears still flowing, her mother comforted her, consoling her like a child. "Don't cry, my daughter," Madame Paulina said softly. "It's never too late to change. But you must learn from this." That day something changed in Happy. As the tears dried and the words from her mother and sisters echoed in her mind, she made a decision. She would learn to cook. From that day on, Happy resolved to do what she had been avoiding for so long. She would take control of her life and start learning the skills she had neglected for years. Slowly, Happy began to change. She started sitting next to her mother in the kitchen, learning how to cook different dishes and mastering various recipes. When her sister Clara would cook, Happy would also sit close by, eager to learn. Her focus shifted from her nails and hair to mastering the art of cooking. It was as if a switch had been flipped. At first, Happy learned simple things like boiling white rice, and then she moved on to frying stew. However, cooking soup still gave her a challenge. Every time she tried to make it, the soup would turn out watery. But the joy of learning how to cook pushed her to keep going, and soon she improved. One day, full of excitement, Happy called her husband to share the good news about her cooking progress. But when he saw her call, he quickly ignored it. She tried again, but the line remained busy. Confused, she sent him a text message, hoping he would respond. When Mr. Anthony finally saw the message, he was happy to hear that she had learned how to cook, but the secret she had kept from him still gnawed at his mind. His thoughts twisted as memories of what had happened came flooding back. Without a word, he hung up the phone. Happy tried calling him again, but he refused to pick up. Her heart sank as she realized the hurt that still lingered between them. The next day, Happy gathered her courage and went to her matrimonial home. As soon as she arrived, she wasted no time. She knelt before her husband, pleading for his forgiveness. "I will not try it again," she said, her voice trembling. "I will not keep secrets from you anymore." Bridget, who had been standing by the door, felt pity for Happy. She too joined in, begging her uncle to forgive her. Mr. Anthony hesitated for a moment, torn by his emotions. Finally he spoke, his voice softening. "I forgive you for the sake of God," he said. As they hugged, the tension between them seemed to lift, though the road to rebuilding trust would take time. By the evening, things had calmed, and Happy felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long while. She had learned not only how to cook, but also the importance of honesty, and that love and trust were the true foundations of any relationship. In the evening of that day, Happy told Bridget how much she had improved in her cooking skills. She also admitted that her soup used to be watery, and asked if they could cook soup together that evening so she could learn how to make it as delicious as Bridget's kind of soup. They decided to do it, and this time it was Happy who took charge of cooking the food while Bridget guided her with instructions. They were both happy that evening, laughing and enjoying the process of cooking together. When Mr. Anthony returned from work, the table was set, and the food was ready. They sat down to eat, and when Anthony tasted the soup he asked, "Who cooked this food?" Bridget smiled and answered, "It was your wife, she cooked it. I just gave her directions." Mr. Anthony was overjoyed. The laughter filled the whole house, and Happy felt a sense of pride she had never experienced before. The journey from her not knowing how to cook to now serving a delicious meal was not just about learning a skill. It was about taking responsibility, improving herself, and rebuilding trust with her husband. Advice to take away. This story teaches us that it's never too late to change, no matter how difficult the journey may seem. Happy's story is a reminder that growth comes with effort and the willingness to learn, even when we are stuck in our ways. It also highlights the importance of honesty in relationships. Happy's decision to admit her mistake and work on it not only helped her improve, but it also brought her closer to her family. Lastly, sometimes we need support from others, just like Bridget did for Happy. Don't be afraid to ask for help or guide someone else. Together we can achieve great things. What an interesting story. I so much appreciate you for following this interesting story to the very end. If you have not subscribed up till now, kindly do so now and help me share the video so that it can get to many people, and don't forget to like, comment by dropping your opinion of how you think about this video from episode 1 to this very point in the comment section. Thank you once again for coming. See you in my next folktale story. Stay blessed.